The question my son asked me should have been simple, but the way he said it, standing in my kitchen like he owned the place, turned my own blood cold. "Mother," he said, not even looking at me, "what could a woman your age possibly need with savings?" At 78, you grow accustomed to certain things. The ache in your hips on a damp morning, the way memories feel closer than yesterday's news, but you never get used to being made to feel like a ghost in your own life. I didn't answer him right away. I just watched the steam rise from my china cup, focusing on its delicate dance, trying to keep my hands from trembling on the saucer. I've always hated when my hands shake in company. It makes people think they can finish your sentences for you. Daniel stood there, tapping his car keys against my countertop, impatient in the way only a grown man who has forgotten he was once a child can be. "I mean it," he repeated. "What's it for? Emergencies? Some grand plan?" He actually chuckled. "At your age? My age." He made it sound like a final chapter, a closed book. As if the decades of waking before dawn to work in the school cafeteria, of sitting up all night with his father during his final illness, of every careful choice that built the security I now hold, as if all of that had been erased by a number. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes in the air, making the kitchen seem warmer than I felt. This was the same table where he'd once painted a wooden duck a brilliant impossible blue. Now, he looked around my home as if it were a waiting room, a temporary space he was just passing through. "I just think it's impractical," he went on with a shrug. "You don't travel, you don't buy fancy things. Why hold on to it when it could actually help someone?" He meant himself. I knew that tone, that thin coat of concern painted over a deep sense of entitlement. I'd heard it before, when he was 19 and needed rent for an apartment too large for his needs. At 30, for a business that never quite materialized. "Daniel," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "my savings are not hurting anyone." He laughed again, a short, hollow sound. "They're not helping either." And there it was, the truth, wrapped in a shiny little sentence. He looked at his watch, his message delivered. "You should think about it," he said lightly, as if discussing the weather. "Money sitting in an account does no good, not at this stage of your life. My life." He spoke of it as if it were already over, as if my desire for quiet mornings, for a roof repaired without his permission, for the simple dignity of not being a burden, was somehow unreasonable. He kissed the top of my head, a quick, dry gesture like signing for a delivery, and was gone. The house always feels different the day after Daniel leaves. It's not the quiet I mind, it's the echo. The lingering sense of a slammed door that keeps vibrating long after the sound has faded. I move through my morning routine slowly, my joints stiff, touching familiar things, the old radio, George's faded apron still hanging on the pantry door. These small, solid objects keep you tethered when people try to make you feel you're floating away. I tried not to dwell on his question, but it crept into every corner of my mind. Why would you need savings at your age? As if I were merely a placeholder, holding on to life for someone else. As if I no longer had the right to feel secure. I made a small bowl of oatmeal and sat by the window. The maple tree in the front yard was letting go of its leaves, yellow and brown, drifting down in lazy spirals. I've always loved that tree. Daniel once climbed so high, his father had to coax him down with the promise of a candy bar. Funny, how those old memories feel more solid and real than the man he is today. Around mid-morning, I heard a soft knock. 3 quick taps, then a 4th. It was my granddaughter, Chloe. She let herself in, her voice a warm balm. "Grandma, I brought you those muffins from the cafe you like." She walked in, her hair in a messy bun, her cheeks flushed from the cold. When she hugged me, she didn't pull away quickly like young people sometimes do, as if afraid age might be contagious. She held on, warm and steadying. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. You look a little tired. Tired is my natural state these days, I joked, but she saw right through me. Did Dad bother you again? She asked gently. I didn't want to pull her into the middle of it, but the good ones, they always sense when something is off. He has opinions, I finally said. More than I asked for. Chloe sighed. He stresses about money, Grandma. He always has. Yes, money. His lifelong companion and his favorite excuse. But underneath her comforting chatter, the numbers in my head kept ticking. I checked my bank balance that morning just to reassure myself, and I'd noticed something. A withdrawal for $220. Then another for $78. I didn't recognize either. They weren't large enough to cause panic, not yet, but they weren't mine. I didn't mention it to Chloe. I didn't want her to worry, but a slow, cold unease began to settle in my chest, filling me inch by inch, like water in a basin. After she left, I gathered my mail, mostly catalogs and flyers. Then, tucked between the envelopes, was a notice from the bank. A recent transaction was completed using your linked authorization. Linked authorization. That was the phrase from last year, when Daniel had convinced me to give him digital access, just in case something happens. I'd trusted him, foolishly thinking it was for emergencies. The notice didn't give details. I'd have to check online or make a call. The very thought made me feel deeply, profoundly tired. The silence in the house after Chloe left was different. It wasn't just quiet, it was waiting. That notice from the bank lay on the kitchen table, a simple piece of paper that felt as heavy as a stone. Linked authorization. The words echoed in my mind, taking me back to a rainy afternoon last year. Daniel had sat in this very kitchen, his voice full of manufactured concern. Mom, the digital world is so confusing. Let me set this up for you just for emergencies, so I can help if you need me. And I, wanting to believe my son was my protector, had agreed. I had handed him a key to my life, thinking it would stay on a hook, unused. The afternoon sun dipped lower, stretching long, thin shadows across the living room rug. I stood by the fireplace, my eyes drifting over the framed photographs on the mantel. There was Daniel as a gap-toothed boy holding a wilting dandelion as if it were a royal scepter. Another of him in his graduation gown, his face full of a future he hadn't squandered yet. And one of him, so young, holding a swaddled Chloe, his expression a mixture of terror and wonder. It struck me then, quiet and sharp as a needle. My son had spent years walking into my life only when something needed fixing, or paying for, or smoothing over. And I had let him. Because motherhood teaches you to give without keeping a tally. But true old age, the kind that settles deep in your bones, teaches you a different lesson. It teaches you to count the cost of every yes you ever said. By evening, the unease had grown into something clearer. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was a cold, dawning awareness. Something was happening with my money. Something I had never agreed to. And Daniel's question from yesterday, why do you need savings at your age? No longer sounded thoughtless. It sounded planned. It sounded like a reason he was giving himself for what he was already doing. I didn't sleep well that night. Not from fear. Fear is an old acquaintance I learned to manage long ago. But because the house itself felt unsettled, as if it were holding its breath along with me. I kept waking, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the steady ticking of the hallway clock, the soft sigh of the wind outside, all of it familiar, yet none of it brought comfort. By morning, I had almost convinced myself it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe the bank notice was a routine alert, something they sent to everyone. Maybe those small withdrawals were for some old subscription I'd forgotten about. The modern world has a way of quietly sneaking payments from you, doesn't it? So, I made a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and sat down with my old laptop. The screen glowed to life, and I signed into my account. My hands were steady. I wanted them to be steady. The numbers on the screen did not lie. 2 more withdrawals, one for $150, another for $90, both marked as approved, and right beside them, the chilling phrase, using linked authorization for Daniel Hensley. I stared at the screen until the letters and numbers began to blur. Not because of my age, my eyesight is still decent when it wants to be, but because there is a particular heaviness that comes when you realize you have handed someone the very knife they are using to cut you. The trust I had given so freely felt like a physical weight in my chest, cold and solid. That was the precise moment the doorbell chimed. Daniel never rings the bell. He always barges in calling Mom, like a teenager looking for a snack. So when I heard that formal sound, I knew. He was already coming with a story prepared, his performance already underway. I closed the laptop lid slowly, a quiet click that felt like the end of something. Hey, he said, stepping inside with a smile that was too wide, too bright for the morning. Thought I'd stop by. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked straight to the counter, grabbed a glass, and filled it from the tap as if he owned the place, then leaned against the sink, studying me. You look tired, he announced. Rough night? Well enough, I replied, my voice even. He made a face, a practiced mix of sympathy and impatience. Listen, about what I said yesterday. You know I didn't mean anything by it. I'm just trying to help you think practically. Practically. What a charming word when used by someone who has never been practical a day in his life. I'm 78, Daniel, I said quietly. Not incompetent. He laughed, a sound too loud for the quiet kitchen. I didn't say you were, but Mom, come on. What are you saving all that money for? A rainy day, I said, meeting his gaze. It's practically pouring for me right now, he shot back, his smile fading. There it was. No dressing it up now. For you, I repeated, the words hanging in the air between us. Well, for us, he corrected quickly. For family. You always said family should help each other. Yes, I did say that. I believed it with my whole heart. But somewhere along the way, help had become a one-way street, and it always led straight to his doorstep. He watched me carefully then, trying to read my silence, to find the softness he was used to bending to his will. I'm dealing with some tight spots right now, he added, switching to a softer, more pleading tone. The same tone he used as a boy when he'd broken a neighbor's window with a baseball. A few overdrafts, some bills, nothing dramatic. I just need access to your account for a little while to straighten things out. I felt my stomach turn. Access? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. You already have access. He froze for a second. Just a flicker, a crack in the performance. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Then he recovered, smoothing his expression. Mom, he said slowly, as if talking to a child. Of course I used it for small things, but you know I'd never take advantage of you. I wanted to believe him. Heaven knows a mother's heart always wants to, but the numbers on the screen were burned into my mind, and his voice, so smooth and persuasive, only made them feel sharper, more real. Daniel, I said, keeping my voice steady as a rock, you need to tell me right now exactly what you have been doing with my account. His expression tightened, not with guilt, but with irritation, as if I were making his life unnecessarily difficult by asking simple, necessary questions. I'm doing what makes sense, he snapped, the pleasant facade crumbling. Your money shouldn't just sit there. And really, Mom, you don't have the expenses you used to. You don't travel. You don't buy things. I don't matter enough. I finished for him, my voice barely a whisper. His mouth opened, then closed. That's not what I said. No, I replied, holding his gaze. But it is what you meant. The air in the kitchen grew thick and heavy, the space between us feeling ancient and tired. Daniel put his glass down on the counter a little too firmly, the clink of it too loud in the silence. And in that moment, I saw something in his face I had prayed I would never see. A sense of ownership, the kind a man feels when he believes something is his, simply because he has decided it should be. "Look," he said finally, lowering his voice into what was supposed to be a reasonable tone. "Just give me your official permission. The bank keeps calling me, asking for confirmation on things. It would be so much easier if I could just handle it myself. You don't need this stress." Easier for him, of course. Always easier for him. I took a slow breath, feeling the steadiness I had found at the bank settle back into my bones. "Let me think about it," I said. He exhaled sharply, a puff of pure annoyance. "Why think about it? It's common sense." No, I thought. Common sense is knowing the difference between a gift and a theft. Common sense is not mistaking a mother's love for a blank check. But I did not say it. I did not argue. There was no point. He left a few minutes later, already on his phone, talking fast to someone, already assuming I would fall in line as I always had. The door closed, and the house settled around me once more. Quiet, still, but I was not. I sat back down in front of my laptop, opened it, and stared at the cold numbers one more time. The clarity that washed over me was so profound it made my hands feel cold. Daniel wasn't asking for access. He was trying to normalize the fact that he had already taken it. And that meant I could no longer just wonder. I needed to know, with absolute certainty, just how deep his hands had already gone. I did not wait long. The moment his car disappeared from view, I moved. I put on my good coat, the one I saved for appointments, grabbed my handbag, and stepped outside before the voice of doubt could whisper in my ear. At my age, hesitation is just another word for surrender, and I have surrendered enough for one lifetime. The autumn air was sharp and clean, almost metallic, cutting through the fog of dread that had filled me these past days. The bank was only a 10-minute drive, but the journey felt much longer. I found myself gripping the steering wheel too tightly, my knuckles pale. I kept hearing his words in my head. "Let me handle it, Mom. It's easier." And I finally asked the question out loud in the quiet of the car. Easier for whom? The parking lot was nearly empty. Inside, the air held the faint, familiar smells of printer ink and citrus-scented cleaner. A young man at the reception desk looked up and offered a polite, bright smile. It was too bright for the heaviness I carried. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" "I need to speak with the manager, please," I said, my voice clear and firm. "Someone who can look into my recent account activity." He nodded and typed something quickly. "Of course. Let me see who's available." I sat in one of the stiff chairs along the wall, smoothing the hem of my coat over my knees. I watched the young man whisper to a woman in a navy blue blazer. She glanced over at me, and her expression held a kind of cautious sympathy, the sort people reserve for the very old or the very confused. I straightened my back immediately. I may be old, I thought, but confusion is not why I'm here. "Mrs. Hensley?" the woman called. I followed her into a small, neat office. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, drawing lines across a desk that was tidy but for a few stacked folders. She introduced herself as Marissa Bolton, a senior account manager. Her voice was soft, yet precise. The much trained to remain calm no matter what storm a client brings through the door. "What can I do for you today?" I placed the printed bank notice on the desk between us. "I received this yesterday," I said. "I did not authorize these transactions." She read it carefully, her eyes scanning the page. Then she turned to her computer, her fingers clicking efficiently across the keyboard. Her eyebrows twitched, just for a fraction of a second, a small professional crack in her composure that she tried to hide, but I caught it. "Let me pull up the full details for you," she murmured. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, a lifetime of self-control holding me in that chair. After a long moment, she turned the monitor slightly toward me. My heart felt like a small, trapped bird. There have been several small withdrawals over the past 2 weeks, she said gently, and a number of scheduled transfers set up to recur monthly. Scheduled? My own voice sounded thin, stretched tight. Yes, she said. Automatic payments. Some of them were initiated about 5 months ago. She hesitated, choosing her next words with care. They're all listed under your secondary authorized user. The room seemed to grow smaller, the walls pressing in. Who is that? I asked, though the answer was a stone in my heart. Daniel Hensley, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Your son. The words were spoken with gentleness, but the truth they carried was harsh and unyielding. I stared at the screen, row upon row of payments, some small, some not so small, all approved through his access. My name was beside amounts I had never seen, for purposes I had never agreed to. Mrs. Hensley, Marissa said softly, leaning forward, did you knowingly give him full authorization to manage your account in this way? I swallowed, the lie I had told myself for months finally shattering into 1,000 pieces. I gave him access for emergencies, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. Not for this. She nodded, her eyes not judging, but deeply understanding. This happens more often than you'd think, she said quietly. Sometimes family members misunderstand the responsibility. Sometimes, she paused, letting the unspoken truth hang in the air for a beat. Sometimes they take advantage. I closed my eyes, letting out a slow, steady breath. It did not come from shock, but from a grim final recognition. Somewhere deep down, in a place I had been too afraid to look, I had known. I had known for a long, long time. When I opened my eyes, they were clear. Can you tell me exactly what he has access to? I asked. She clicked through more screens. He can move funds between your accounts, approve new transactions, modify automatic transfers, and her tone tightened slightly. He can add new payees. It felt like a hand was pressing down on my chest. Years of trust, handed over so casually, now stared back at me in cold, clinical numbers and options he should never have possessed. I looked directly at Marissa Bolton, my voice firm and unwavering. I want it all revoked, I said. Every permission, every point of access, immediately. Marissa met my gaze, and this time she didn't look at me as an elderly woman who was confused. She looked at me as someone reclaiming something precious. Of course, she said, her voice filled with a quiet respect. I'll make the changes right now. As her fingers flew across the keyboard, I watched the screen, not reading the details, but witnessing the slow, deliberate erasure of a door I never should have left unlocked. It was like watching a fortress being quietly, firmly sealed. When she finished, she printed several forms, the sound of the printer a satisfying finality. You'll need to sign these for our records, she said, sliding them toward me. I picked up the pen. My hands did not shake, not even a little. Mrs. Hensley, she added carefully, once this is fully processed, any transaction your son attempts to make will be denied. Any linked card he might be using will simply stop working. A deep, unexpected calm settled into me, like warm water after a long, cold day. That's perfectly fine, I said, my voice strong and clear. Let it stop. When I walked out of the bank, the sun had broken through the clouds, casting long, hopeful shadows across the pavement. I stood on the steps for a moment, breathing in the crisp air. I felt no fear, no guilt, just a quiet, steady truth, solid as the ground beneath my feet. Daniel was no longer going to be the manager of my life, and he was about to find out. He showed up far sooner than I had expected. I had barely returned home and taken off my coat when I heard his car pull up, too fast and too loud for our quiet street. I stood perfectly still, listening to the heavy thud of his feet on the porch, the impatient jangle of the doorknob. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open and walked in like a man entering a room he owned. "Mom!" His voice was a sharp crack in the hallway. "We need to talk." I walked into the living room and held onto the back of my armchair, not for support, but to ground myself in what was mine. He stood there, holding up his bank card like it was a piece of damning evidence. "There's something wrong with my Kirt Mawal," he announced, his face a mask of wounded pride. "I tried to pay for gas, and it was declined." "Declined? Do you know how embarrassing that is?" Embarrassing. That was his primary concern. "I know," I said, my voice quiet but firm. His eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "What do you mean, you know?" "I went to the bank today." The words hung in the air, simple and heavy. That stopped him. Not completely. Daniel doesn't stop easily, but it slowed him enough for me to see the flicker of pure panic behind the irritation. "The bank?" he repeated, forcing a casual tone. "Why would you go there? I told you I could handle everything online for you." "I didn't ask you to handle everything," I replied. He exhaled sharply through his nose, a sound of pure frustration. "Mom, please don't make this into some big drama. I've only been trying to help you. You gave me access because you were confused by all the technology." "I wasn't confused," I interrupted, my gaze steady on him. "I trusted you." The silence that followed my words was not empty. It was full, bloated with every unspoken truth we had carefully avoided for years. He looked away first, pretending to straighten a picture frame on the wall, pretending he wasn't just buying time to concoct a new story. "What did they tell you?" he finally asked, his voice a low grumble. "That you've been moving money," I said, each word deliberate, "setting up automatic transfers, approving withdrawals I knew nothing about." He flinched, but it was only a slight tremor, quickly suppressed. "Those were small amounts, Mom. I told you. Things are tight right now, but it's temporary. I just needed a little help to keep everything afloat." "You didn't ask," I said softly. His jaw tightened, a muscle flickering. "I shouldn't have to ask," he snapped. "I'm your son." There it was, the core belief he had nurtured all these years, watered by my silence and my softness, the belief that my life was merely an extension of his needs. "I have supported you many times before, Daniel," I said, my voice gentle but unyielding. His head snapped back toward me, his eyes flashing. "Because I needed it, and you had the money just sitting there gathering dust. You don't even use it." I felt that newfound steadiness rise up inside me, the kind that comes when a long-neglected part of your soul finally clicks into its rightful place. "Daniel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but filled with iron. "My money is not sitting there, waiting for someone else to decide it's unnecessary." He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Mom, honestly, you're overreacting. This isn't a crime. I was helping us both. You have no idea what could happen in the future." "I know exactly what can happen," I replied, looking around my own living room. It was happening already. He took a step toward me, raising his hands as if he were talking a small child out of a tantrum. "Okay, fine. Let's just fix this. You call the bank right now. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding and to reinstate my access." "No." He froze, his body rigid with shock. "No?" he repeated, as if the word itself was foreign to his ears. "No," I said again, my voice calm and final. "It is not a misunderstanding. I have revoked your authorization." His face hardened then, anger swiftly overtaking the surprise. "Mom, you can't be serious. I need that access. My situation is complicated right now." "Then handle it," I said quietly. "Your complications are not my emergency." He stared at me, his eyes searching mine, trying to find the soft, pliable woman he was used to commanding, the woman he had always mistaken for being weak. "Do you have any idea how irresponsible this is?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You're making everything harder for both of us." "For you," I corrected him gently. "Not for us." He shook his head, pacing a tight circle, running a hand through his hair exactly as he did when he was a boy who had been cornered in a lie. "I'm your son," he said again, as if repetition could bend my will. "You owe me some trust." "I owe you love," I said. "And you have it. But trust is not given by obligation. It is earned. And you, my dear boy, have broken it." He stopped his pacing. His shoulders slumped for just a second, and I saw something tired and almost boyish cross his face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "So that's it?" he asked, his voice flat. "You're cutting me off?" "I am taking back what is rightfully mine," I replied. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then let out a scoff of disbelief. "You know what? Fine. Do whatever you want. But when your finances fall apart, don't you dare call me. Don't expect me to come and fix your problems." I let his words settle in the room. They were meant as a punishment, but to me they sounded like freedom. "I won't," I said. He grabbed his jacket, muttered a curse under his breath, and slammed the front door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. The house trembled for a moment. Then everything fell into a deep, resonant silence. I thought the worst was over once Daniel stormed out. But the quiet that followed didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the pause before the next storm, the air thick with something I couldn't name. I tried to busy myself with small chores, but my hands kept slowing. My thoughts drifting back to the look in his eyes before he left. It wasn't just anger, it was disbelief, as if he'd encountered a version of me he didn't recognize, one that had finally stopped bending. On the third evening, as the sky turned a bruised shade of blue, he returned. This time he came on foot. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, a slow, dragging shuffle up the garden path. Not the storming gait of a man ready for a fight, but the heavy tread of someone who has run out of rehearsed speeches. I opened the door before he could knock. He looked different, exhausted, the kind of tired that begins deep in the eyes and seeps down into the shoulders. His jacket was crooked, his hair unkempt. "Mom," he said, his voice low and ragged. "Can we talk?" "Yes," I answered, stepping aside. "Come in." He followed me to the living room, but didn't sit. He stood by the mantel, staring at the photographs of his own life, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm against his thigh. "I've had a rough couple of days," he began. "You probably don't care, but I'm telling you anyway." I folded my hands in my lap, a portrait of calm. "I do care, Daniel, but caring does not mean I agree with what you did." He let out a long, shaky breath and rubbed his forehead. "You blindsided me, just cut me off without any warning." "I warned you for years," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Every time I asked what you were spending, every time I wondered if you planned to pay back what you'd borrowed. You didn't hear the warnings because you weren't listening." He stopped pacing, his face tightening, not in anger, but in something closer to genuine sorrow. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." "I know," I said. He blinked, surprised by the softness in my tone. Perhaps he expected me to lash out, but that wasn't what this moment required. I didn't know what else to do," he continued, his voice cracking. "I kept thinking I'd catch up, that I'd fix everything. And then more bills came, and more things broke. I didn't want to come to you again, asking for help. I knew what you'd think of me." I looked at him quietly. There was no triumph in seeing him like this, only a deep familiar ache. The ache of a mother who has loved someone so much she forgot to let him fall when he needed the lesson most. "Daniel," I said softly, "you didn't come to me. You went behind my back." He sank into the armchair across from me, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I know, but Mom, I wasn't stealing. I used the card because I truly believed it was okay. You weren't using the money. I thought we were being practical. We? I asked gently. Or you? He looked away, his voice dropping to a whisper. I thought you'd want to help. I did want to help, I said, but wanting to help is not the same as being taken for granted. A quiet settled between us, thick, but not hostile. It was the quiet of truth, heavy and honest. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples, as if trying to massage away a lifetime of poor choices. I'm drowning, he said, the words barely audible. I've made a mess of everything, and I know it. I'm not proud, but when that card stopped working, I panicked. He glanced up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and weary. And then I got angry because I felt so completely alone. His voice trembled on that last word, and for the first time I heard the frightened boy inside the man. Daniel, I said, leaning forward slightly, you are not alone, but you cannot use me as a life jacket every single time you refuse to learn how to swim. He swallowed hard, the sound loud in the quiet room. So what now? He asked, his voice small. Are you cutting me out for good? No, I said, my voice clear and steady. I am setting boundaries, hard ones, the kind I should have set for you years ago. He nodded slowly, as if the idea frightened him, but also, somehow, steadied him. I am not giving you access to my accounts again, I said. That part is final. He didn't protest this time. His shoulders simply sagged, as if he had been expecting, or perhaps even needing to hear those words. But, I continued, I will help you find someone. A financial advisor, a counselor, a professional who can help you sort this out, not me. He stared at me for a long moment, his breathing uneven. That's fair, he said at last. That's more fair than I deserve. Another silence fell, but this one felt different. Less like smoke, more like dust finally settling after a long upheaval. Mom, he said suddenly, his voice small and fragile. Yes, Daniel? I'm sorry. The words were quiet, imperfect, but they were real. I felt them land in my chest, a warm, heavy weight I hadn't known I was waiting for. I know, I said, and I hear you. He wiped his eyes quickly, a gesture of embarrassment he'd had since he was small. I can't believe how badly I've handled everything. You can learn, I said, if you choose to. He stood slowly, as if the room itself was reluctant to let him leave. I'll try, he said, not meeting my eyes. I don't know how yet, but I'll try. That is all I can ask, I replied. He nodded, walked to the door, and paused with his hand on the knob. He turned back as if to say something more, but the words wouldn't come. He simply stepped out into the quiet night, closing the door gently behind him, something he hadn't done in years. I sat there for a long while, hands folded, heart steady. There was no victory in the room, only the sobering presence of truth, and I was learning that truth is the only thing strong enough to carry both love and disappointment without collapsing under the weight. I woke before the sun, the room bathed in that honest, pale blue light I've always loved. In that hour, nothing hides, not disappointment, not quiet victories. I sat up, my feet finding the familiar floor. My bones ached their usual complaint, but the heavy weight I'd carried for so long was gone. The house greeted me softly, without any demands. I thought of Daniel, not with anger, but with a steady understanding. People show you who they are over time. The hardest part of love is sometimes accepting the person standing before you, not the one you hold in your memory. Quote 5. But love is not a surrender, and setting a boundary is not a betrayal. A soft knock broke the quiet. When I opened the door, Chloe stood there, a scarf around her neck, her smile genuine and warm. "Good morning, Grandma. I brought you breakfast." Her presence filled the house like a gentle light. We sat together, talking about her work, about the small, normal dramas of life, the kind that asks for nothing but your honest attention. At one point, she reached over and took my hand. "Are you really okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I looked into her clear, kind eyes. "I am," I said. And for the first time in a long, long while, I truly meant it. After she left, the house felt witnessed, not empty. The rest of the day moved gently. I sat on the porch for a time, breathing in the cool air, watching a neighbor teach her little granddaughter to ride a bike. The child wobbled, nearly tipping, but the grandmother held the seat just long enough for her to find her balance. Balance. Perhaps that is all I had ever been searching for. As dusk settled, soft and lavender colored, I stepped outside one last time. The street was calm. My life was still mine. My story was still mine. And this quiet, unwavering dignity was something no one could ever take from me again. We grow older. We grow quieter. But if we choose, we also grow braver.